this man. I met him a few weeks ago. No, it was a couple months ago. He's an amazing guy. What I didn't know, the first thing I learned about him. Have you been on JS Poland on YouTube? Anyone has been? There we go. Thank you. Well, if you did not go there, you should, because Erik is there. This is the first thing that I learned about Erik, and it's awesome for parties, for just making people laugh. So I was just cracking up. It was just hilarious. So JS Poland on YouTube, you know what I'm talking about. And basically, what can I say? If you go there, you know what I mean. Great guy, true, very, very good friend right now. I hopefully will become friends one day, in the true sense of this word. But without further ado, Erik Haddad, everyone. Big round of applause. Take it away once again.
If you haven't had enough of PWAs today, progressive web apps with Angular and Firebase. My name is Erik Haddad. I work at Google. I live in San Francisco and I work on the Firebase team. A little bit about me. Studied computer science, got an MBA, worked in industry, used to work at ESPN and Disney, and I've been at Google for almost 3 years. And here's what we're going to talk about. Real quick overview of what Angular is. Refresh your memory of what PWA is, in case you forgot from 10 minutes ago. And familiarize yourself with Firebase. And then from there, we'll talk about Angular plus Firebase. And show you how to get up and running with Angular Fire 2. Give you a nice little app demo. And show you how to benchmark your app. And a little bit of console exploration. So let's get started. What is Angular? How many Angular users are there in the audience today? I like that. Okay, good. So, Angular as a platform makes it easy to build applications with the web. What distribution of AngularJS versus Angular do we have in the audience? AngularJS? Okay, Angular. All right. So, just to be clear, when I say Angular, it's version 2, 4 plus. Angular v1 is commonly known as AngularJS. So from the Angular CLI, you could do a bunch of powerful things. You can do scaffolding and generation, serving and developing, build and distribute, and you could test using what's visualized here is Protractor and Karma. Super powerful, and goal here is to ship portable code, work with PWAs and libraries Ionic, NativeScript, and Electron. And what makes a PWA? I bet a bunch of you can answer that now. In case you haven't noticed, PWAs are a big deal. Yeah. So the goals are to make your app reliable, fast, and engaging. And we talked about Angular. Angular team at Google is focused on making the applications better and supporting PWAs by default, and giving you adequate tooling and a powerful CLI behind it. We've talked about the Surface Worker quite a bit today. Here's a quick description of what it is. Let's visualize it. So the Angular CLI, just by flipping a bit, the Service Worker true, should enable your app to be PWA compliant. The Service Worker is the magic behind the scenes. It uses the knowledge of your application's files to act as a proxy and serve things from cache. There it is, being a proxy. And another thing is it's the go-between. So if there are any messages or any tasks in the background that need to be executed, it will do it for you. In this case, the ng Service Worker, which exists now and is getting more powerful. In this case, you can register for push and consume push notifications as observables. And as I said, looking forward, Angular will be supporting PWA by default, and you could expect to see that in the coming months. All right, so to make your Angular application PWA compliant, these 4 things are the keys: manifest.json, NGSW manifest, SW register, worker basic. What does that look like? Manifest.json. We're specifying here a long name, short name, some rich iconography, so when you add to your home screen, that'll show up, and an entry point to your app. Now the NGSW manifest, a little bit more detail. You're pointing out all the assets and things that you want to cache offline, a little bit of routing, and some regex to help your app understand what's underlying. All right, now, what is Firebase? Who's using Firebase here? All right, who wants to use Firebase? You will. Cool. So traditional app development, kind of a pain. You would focus much of your time on infrastructure. You would have an idea, you'd have a startup idea or some cool thing that you'd want to hack on, but oh no, I have to set up my LAMP infrastructure. I have to, patch Linux and set up Mongo. I have to do all these things to make sure I'm secure. And really you lose sight of what's important: your idea, your app. With Firebase, you just drop in SDK and a little bit of configuration, and you, out of the box, get real-time database storage, a lot of analytics, a lot of powerful tooling, and it's geared toward mobile development and has special stuff for web as well. So the basic that Firebase started off with, the real-time database, and authentication is a biggie. We'll get to that, and storage. So about the database, you can sync in real time. Now, Angular has a buzzword 2-way data binding. With Firebase, you get 3-way data binding. So you make an update on your screen, everyone else gets that update in real time, and you're not writing messy jQuery to manipulate the DOM. Angular is just reflecting the state of the data in real time for you and for everyone else subscribed. Now, Firebase Auth. This is a super powerful and underrated feature. You would not want to spend your time configuring for all these third-party providers, figuring out auth 0, auth n, auth whatever, and managing your tokens and syncing up. It's a pain. So this out of the box, you have access to many third-party providers, email. You can even support anonymous. And as we announced at Google I/O, we now have support for phone. So your phone number can now act as an authentication method. What does all that mean? You have a single auth credential coming in from all of these. So Firebase does some magic and extracts a unique identifier for you as you exist through all of these services. So you can log in through Facebook one day and Google the next, and it'll resolve you as the same person. Firebase storage. Making sure that when you try to upload, it gets uploaded securely, and even on shaky Wi-Fi, it'll go through. And there is a whole suite of products here: AdMob and AdWords and indexing and invites and a whole bunch of other stuff you can play with. And here's one of my favorites. So Cloud Functions for Firebase. This was the #1 requested thing in the last 2 years. This is the glue between products and external services. So let's say you wanted to integrate with a third-party API. You would have to spin up a server and write some code to fetch and store that for you. No longer do you have to spin up an extra server. Now you just write or copy-paste some Node.js code into Firebase, and it will store it and authenticate, push message, whatever you want. So for example here, if I create a user or a user authenticates, Cloud Function will detect that event and trigger something else. If, let's say, I have a chat app and I submitted a message to the database, the event being a new chat message exists, Cloud Functions would detect it, it would go and, let's say, do translate API or bad words filter or something else and push it, store it, and return. So there are so many different things you can do. One more example, like with storage. Let's say you want to resize images on the fly, upload to storage, we detect that there's a new image. Your Node.js code that you copied in there, it will resize and store all those thumbnails. And these are all the things that you can hook into. And if you go to GitHub, all the samples are there. There's lots more coming. All right, so now we know what Firebase is and Angular. This is how they work together. Angular Fire 2. So it's now at version 4, RC0. It is observable based. I don't know how much we're familiar with the observables, but super powerful. RxJS, real-time data bindings, hooks for the database and your authentication states. And now with v4, it's modular, so you can reduce those bundle sizes, be super lean. Here's how you get started with it. Some installation, some imports, and set some environment variables. Like I said before, super powerful, just dropping in an SDK and 6 lines of configuration, copy pasted from the console into your app, and it works. How can you use it in your component? For those who are familiar with the Angular syntax, very straightforward. You're injecting the database and auth, and then you can do stuff with it. Example here. Have some HTML markup here, how you'd hook into it, and some simple functions off to the right for auth. And likewise with the database, how do you retrieve data as a collection or list, and how you loop through it and output it, and then for an individual object. So pretty straightforward. Now here's a killer feature of Angular Fire 2, and something that's requested of Firebase out of the box is querying. So with observables and subjects and RxJS, you're able to subscribe to a data source, provide a subject, and as that subject changes via user input or what have you, the subject will force the observable to refresh, and it'll go back to the database and pull back exactly. So if you want pagination, if you want filtering, if you want any of those features, Angular Fire 2, the querying is super powerful and highly recommended. All right, so let's check out an app that I created for today. This is called Your Mileage May Vary. And if I can pull that up over here. All right, we'll see how this goes. Yeah. All right. So we have a loading screen here. I'm going to authenticate right here with a redirect coming through. We now have an auth token, and I'm authenticated. So let's get started. So a little bit of background on this. I'm passionate about travel. I do it a lot, and I needed a way to visualize and track all the places I've been. So I built this app. So here's a quick overview. I can view all the places I've been. I can go through my boarding passes over time, view some stats, how many miles I've traveled in the last year and a half, how much money, blah, blah, blah. And apologies that this is in miles and not kilometers, and the date format is not to your liking, most likely. But yeah, this is all Angular, all built off of Angular Fire. And so this gave me a good test bed for how to convert to PWA. So I have lots of data here. Oh, also another fun little thing. So let's say go from San Francisco to Warsaw. Little mileage calculator using math. And if you, yeah, we're talking radians here. So if you want to view this, you can log on, and there is an icon in the upper right next to the avatar. If you click that, you can actually view this demo data. I've made the database rules accessible for anyone to see and play with this. So, so yeah, it's fully responsive. Yeah, and you can go through and add your data from here, and it'll push to the database. So yeah, what does this look like in the actual database? So here I have a lot of data. Let's go to user flights. So this is all real-time data here. If you're familiar with JSON, you're just taking that JSON and just shoving it into the database. You're able to index on it as well. So if I pull up some database rules, so like airlines, you see that? I need to zoom in. So we're looking at this, each one here. Here's the structure. Here's that unique ID for the user that I talked about earlier. And for each row, you have a unique key, and then some data about the flight. So here you can set rules for security, making sure that anybody that views this data has to be authenticated. And then in order to write, you have to be authenticated, and you have to be the owner of the data. So you can be assured that you can store anything you want, and you can secure it at the same time. Very straightforward rule syntax, and you can actually view it here in the console as well, manipulate it, and a view of the usage going on. This is me cramming right before the demo. So you can view the data, you can view who's been authenticated here, and you can revoke that access. These are the different sign-in methods that I mentioned earlier. Quite simple to just enable or disable. So when I logged in for the very first time, I kicked off a function, and that function looks like this. So very straightforward Node.js code. I'm doing some requires here. I'm saying when there's a new user on create, I'm taking that third-party auth data, bringing that in, and I'm forming my own profile. So this is something that was requested at a conference a few months ago, was how can I make my own profile system? Here's an easy way using functions to take that third-party data that can be somewhat different and structure it uniformly, and then store it in that user's directory. So that's what that looks like right here. So this is different profiles here. So you control the data once it's in there. Could have done a bunch more with functions. You can check out my GitHub repos for some other examples. Let's dive into what the manifest looks like. So here, direction left to right, language, long name, short name, scope, a lot of the same things. Theme, so when you pin to the home screen, the theme color will kick in and be behind the iconography with a little bit of text. And then once you want to hook up your push messaging, you have a sender ID that you can get from the Cloud Console. NGSW looks very similar to what was there earlier in the slides, but here's the big one for enabling push notifications. And how would you want to test that? So I can go over here, go to application. You can see that there is a worker. I'll refresh the page right here to get some new. So you can see that there is a worker. I'll refresh the page right here to get some new. right, let's get a fresh. There we go. All right. Let's unregister this one. Reload the page. Or not. All right, there we go. All right, so service worker is active, and we have a stats page there. Let's test this push notification, or not. Might be because I'm presenting. All right, trust me, it works. In the upper right, you'll see push notification handled by Chrome. It'll interact with your service worker that is registered, and you'll see a push notification coming from Chrome saying this is a test message from localhost. And it works beautifully when it does. Let's see. So this is what the index.html is. I'll show you why I've commented these out when we go through the benchmarking. But here I'm providing some splash content while Angular is loading. That way there is not this period of unstyled content. And especially on 3G and slower connections, this is super important to actually have something on the screen while everything else is being loaded from cache or from remote sources. One of those blockers was the fonts, and in the end I ultimately downloaded the fonts and I served them locally and improved my benchmark score by 20 points. And just real quick, what's powering the shell here of the app. The nav is coming from right here, and I'm injecting my auth service, and I have a data service that interacts with Firebase and some other routing stuff, and this is where the observables come in. I'm subscribed to Firebase authentication state, and then I handle that here, and if I was to log out, the app would react accordingly. And layout-wise, in CSS, I'm using media queries, but at the same time, also powerful, very handy to have the flex layout module that I can inject, and I can sense when I've resized and show and hide elements accordingly using Angular. And there's the log out. All right, and just to show you, I did use some math in my grade school education. So yeah, there's the calculating mileage. And real quick, getting into this. So I have this commented out right now. Here's some handy tools. Hopefully you can get them up and running. They're still being actively developed, and they will be rolled into the future of Angular CLI and making PWAs part of the app by default. Anyway, this NGU app shell will take in a module, analyze it, and can create a module like a loading screen dynamically and insert that in your app for performance. And it can also generate the service worker manifest from your app. I had a little bit of troubles with it, so I defaulted to a safer method for this demo. But if you check on GitHub, you can see all the justifications and some of the things that commented out. So, and all of this, in the end, you Firebase deploy. That will push to hosting, will post your, or publish your database rules, your storage rules, and initialize all of your functions. So, Angular CLI, Firebase CLI, working nicely together. So, let's go back to slides here. All right, so I alluded to benchmarking, and here's how we do it using Lighthouse. Used to be a Chrome extension on its own. Now it's wrapped into Chrome, into the developer tools. Open source automated tool for improving the quality of the web pages. Puts it through a myriad of tests, and you can see them and So here's where to find it in Chrome. Let's run this test. Hope we had better luck than the push notifications. So here are the different audits you can perform, and you can actually see it going through. Oh, oh, this is why. Okay, I had multiple tabs. That's why the push notifications weren't working. Note to self. And as this goes through, if you were to push the button in succession, sometimes there's variation, light variation in the performance metrics, but pretty reliable, and it'll give you justifications and recommendations in how to make your app better. So nice. All right. So as a PWA, this app is 100. Accessibility 100, which earlier today was 98. Because of some SVGs. Best practices, 100. I need to work on my performance. Here's how it breaks down, the meaningful paint, and some other things that are blocking and increasing latency, and keeping in mind users who are using 3G connection and offline mode. With Firebase, especially authentication, it's very useful to have a remote connection and access your real-time data. So we're at Firebase, we're working on that. But yeah, here's how to go through it, and you can view the individual items. And so yeah, we just view the console. And really, what is it looking for? So is the site served over HTTPS? And good news, Firebase hosting, you automatically get SSL and HTTPS for free. Are your pages responsive on tablets and mobile devices? Media queries are your friend. The start URL in the manifest and the NGSW, we're specifying routing and start URLs. So give an entry point. Metadata, both in the manifest for the iconography, the colors and the names, and make sure you call out the manifest in your index.html. And Chrome has throttling features outside of just this audit tool. You can actually throttle your internet connection test, if you are in an emerging market with very high latency and you're on edge connection or whatever, or let's say you wanted to test on tethering connection, whatever, it's very humbling. So definitely test that. Test that it works cross-browser. Page transitions, don't be fancy. Load the content, and each page has a URL. That way you can deep link. So, as we said earlier, PWAs, big deal. And Angular will soon support PWAs by default. Firebase, the things you can try right now: auth, database, hosting, and storage. Make your lives easy, secure, and scalable. Angular Fire sits atop Angular. Oh, that should not be Angular 2. I'm going to get yelled at. Uses RxJS and observables, making your UIs fun and responsive. And use Lighthouse and other tools within Chrome DevTools to benchmark and make your app the best it can be. And once again, focus on the innovation and the concepts. Let Firebase do all the heavy lifting. And real quick, Firebase is free, so you can jump in, hack away. And the thresholds and quotas are super high. So go in there, hack away, build your next startup idea. You have a huge ceiling there, and once you want to increase your bandwidth and your quotas, whatever, starts at $25 a month or pay as you go. And the good news is a Firebase project is a Google Cloud project. So let's say you're starting small, but you want to scale up in the end using some advanced machine learning and whatever else on the Google Cloud that'll power apps like Snapchat. Once that project exists in Firebase, it can graduate to a Google Cloud project because they are one and the same. And some quick credits and references. So the docs and much of my presentation was inspired by a talk at Google I/O. So you can check that out, and some other documentation for best practices and how to debug your service workers. And everything you saw in my app is powered by Angular Material. They are components that are accessible and uniform, look pleasant, good transitions, etc. Check it out. Makes app development much more pleasant. And with 16 seconds left, thank you.